Um, okay, hi, we'll get started. Good morning. It's good to be back with all of you. And I wanted just to ask, as we're about to start, if anyone would like to dedicate our learning today to a loved one, someone on a healing journey, or the memory of somebody who's died. If we have anybody who you're holding in your hearts today. Yeah.
I'd like to dedicate it to Zipporah Barzilai, my mother-in-law. She's gravely ill in Haifa, and I'm thinking of her.
Thank you, Gary. So for Tzipora Barzilai. Thank you. And I'm also holding in my heart our dear Matan Kach, with hopes for refuah shlema. Yes.
My mom's yahrzeit tomorrow.
Okay, Sipra's mother's yahrzeit. Thank you. Thank you, Sipra. May her memory be a blessing. Okay, we'll say the bracha. It ends with la'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, I'm so excited to be back with you. Each of these sessions is designed to stand alone, but as you've noticed, even between Rabbi Panitz's sessions and mine, and certainly between and among the ones that I've taught, there are all kinds of connections that we're weaving from one session to another. So don't worry if you're new to this today, we'll catch you up. But this is something that's been on my mind now for several months and crystallized while I was in Jerusalem last week doing some learning. And one of the texts that we have been looking at together, the text from Gittin, that talks about the many stories of why the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, really made very clear that I have a very particular take on one piece of this story. So we're going to come to that in the end of today's session. But in order to get there, we're going to have to go through another text that some of you who've been around IKAR for some time will recognize, because it's in my personal set of random sugiyot that I love and keep circling back to. And everybody has their own little personal kind of box album. What repertoire. This is certainly among mine, but as we've seen with many of the texts that we've looked at in this shiur, in this class together, we're looking at them in a very different way. We never grant ourselves the time to really dive deep like we are in this class. So I'm very grateful and very excited to look at this material with you. So we're going to start with the Mishnah from Yoma, the second chapter, and we're going to look at the first two Mishnayot of the second chapter. And you're going to see a picture painted for you of a ritual enactment in temple times. So I'll take us through it first. Take us through it in the English. The practice among the priests initially was that whoever wishes to remove the ashes from the altar would remove them, meaning there are certain people of the priestly class whose responsibility it is to engage in the service on the Temple Mount. Part of the service was the removal of the ashes, and whoever wanted to would volunteer that day and they would go up and remove it. But when there were many priests who wanted to perform the same task, like all the rabbis want to give the Devar Torah on Parshat Yitro, so you have to decide who's going to do it. And what they determined was that they would have a race. They would have a race. The priests would run and they would ascend on the ramp that would lead to the top of the altar. We're in Jerusalem, holiest city, Temple Mount, holiest place in the holiest city. And here the priests are actually engaging in a physical race to ascend the ramp to get up to the altar. And any priest who preceded the other and reaches within 4 cubits of the top of the altar first would be privileged to get to engage in the temple service of removal of the ashes on that day. But of course, what would happen if they were tied? So if they were equal and neither preceded the other, the appointed priest would say to all of the priests, extend your fingers, and they would do a lottery, as will be explained later. And we're not actually going to be focusing on the lottery part, but they would essentially, it sounds like choose a number, and then they would go around and count, and then you'd put down that finger, and whoever had their finger remaining would get the privilege. It's like a child's game. Exactly. It's basically, it's like duck, duck, goose, right? And so the one who had their finger still standing out at the end would get the privilege of engaging in the temple service of housekeeping, of cleaning up, sweeping, picking up the ashes around the altar. I'm going to go on to number 2 for a moment, because initially it says that was the procedure, but an incident once happened when 2 priests were running up the ramp to reach the altar, and one of them shoved the other one, and he fell down, and he broke his leg. And so the court saw that that people were coming to potential danger through this mechanism for deciding who gets to engage in the sacred service. And so instead, they instituted that the priest would do this lottery thing with the fingers instead. Okay, pause there for a moment. Now, I want to backtrack by just giving a little bit more context to what's going on here, which is, according to biblical law, the first of the daily procedures that the priests would have to do that was connected to the offerings, the sacrificial offerings at the temple, was that they would have to remove these ashes. And this comes directly from the book of Leviticus. It says in chapter 6 that the priest should get dressed up in linen garments and linen breeches and take up the ashes that come from the fire of the burnt offering. And so they would go up and get this shovel full of ash, and then they would go and place the ashes in the proper place where it's to be received. It used to be that it was first come, first serve, or that there was minimal interest in engaging in this ritual, but only when so many people decided that they wanted to do it once did they have to come up with a kind of system to respond to it. And so they create this ritual of the race. And the lots in this version of the story are really an attempt to respond to what very naturally would happen when 11-year-old boys are racing up the ramp. One of them's going to shove the other one because they want to get to the end first. Now, the priests, as far as we know, were not 11-year-old boys. But it seems like what the rabbis are saying is that when you put a bunch of men together and you make the stakes very high, they will behave like 11-year-old boys. And so they will shove each other and someone's going to get hurt. And so they had to create a different kind of ritual other than the race, which was the lots, their attempt to kind of democratize or equalize access to the sacred space. Okay. The reason I'm saying 11-year-old boys is because there's not a whole lot of scholarship around one of my favorite sugiot, which we're about to go into, pieces of Talmud. But a few of the articles that do exist about this ritual really look at it from a feminist perspective, from a gendered perspective and there are no women that appear anywhere in this story, but they're really looking at what are the rabbis saying about the masculine culture of the temple and the sacrificial rites. And so I want to just lift up, as we're about to begin, the question of whether or not any of this really happened, or is this just in the rabbinic imagination? Is this the way that the rabbis imagined what was going on when the temple stood, knowing, as we all do now, that, of course, the text was the text that we're going to learn, both the Mishnah, which was codified in 220 CE, so about 150 years after the destruction of the temple, and the Talmud, which was hundreds of years after the destruction of the temple. This is their remembering of what happened there, but it's definitely guided by their perception of, or their critique of, what they imagined was going on in temple times, okay? That's the setup. We're not really talking about ash, we're not talking about lottery, but that's the setup of what you need to know in order to go into our sugya today. Everyone okay? Okay, good. So here it is. It is Yoma 23a on the RSB box hit favorite sugya list. So here we go. So it was taught in the Mishnah that an incident once occurred in which two of the priests were head to head as they ascended the ramp, and one of them shoved the other one, and he fell off the ramp and broke his leg. But the rabbis say, you think that's a good story. I've got a better story for you. They bring a story that appears in the Tosefta, a different incident in which two priests were running head to head and ascending the ramp. and one of them reaches that sacred kind of finish line of 4 cubits before the altar, when his colleague, the other priest, Steinsaltz adds here, out of anger, which we might have thought out of love, I don't know, took a knife and stabbed the other priest in the heart, presumably from the back because he's behind the other priest. We're going to pause there for a moment. I heard you all turning your page already, but we're going to just pause for a moment to just reflect on what it means that our Talmud is telling us a story that one-ups the truly objectively terrible story that appears in the Mishnah, in which one priest violently attacks another priest, shoves him off the ramp so that he can get there first. But the rabbis one-up the story and take the knife, have one of the priests taking a knife and stabbing the other in the back with that knife. First, why does he have a knife? Why is he bringing a weapon into, this is not a synagogue in Texas. Why is he bringing a weapon? Sorry. Because he's going up to offer a sacrifice, or that's part of the garb that one wears when they're engaged in the sacrificial work, because removal of ashes does not require a knife. But presumably he takes a knife that's intended for sacrificial offering and he stabs his friend, his colleague, with whom he's competing for the right to engage in the sacred work, okay? So what so far in our story is the moral message that you could derive from what the rabbis are offering here? Can't say it louder, Melissa. Okay, so I'm going to just, by the way, for folks who are with us at home, I'm just going to repeat everything because I understand that we're having a problem. Because I was running through Jerusalem listening to Rabbi Panitz's wonderful shiurim of the last 2 weeks and realized that you can't hear the people who are asking questions. So I'll ask you to just introduce yourself and then say your comment and I'll share. So one of them, so Melissa believes that the idea is power corrupts. So broadly speaking, when people are competing for power, even when the power comes from being of service, like I'm volunteer of the month, you're not volunteer of the month, they might lose track of what's most important. And in their confusion, their kind of moral confusion, their corruption, they engage in an act of violence against another person. That's great. What else could be drawn from this text so far? Yeah.
Yaakov, and noticing that since there's a literalization of like the hands of danger in the knife, and it's having the same root as danger in the Mishnah, so maybe something about systematizing access being a way of responding to danger.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And this is Yaakov who says there's something about systematizing danger, the connection between the knife and danger. And I also will say it brings into our imagining of what we might have thought was a peaceful and sacred activity, the removal of the ash from the altar, the question of physical threat and danger, which we might not have imagined, except for, I want to just ask you, how do you imagine the temple rituals? Were they peaceful and sacred rituals when you think about it? I'm going to come to you in a second, or Jill, go ahead, if you want to answer that. But
I was going to say that about norepinephrine and epinephrine, fight or flight. And if you have a feeling of competition, you have a weapon with you, and the hormones in your system could flood. It's like flooding something. So it was sort of a takeoff on.
That's great. So Jill, it's always good to have a doctor in the room. So Jill is saying norepinephrine and epinephrine, the fight or flight, that there might be something hormonal happening. You're in a race, you're in a fierce competition. Oh, I just remembered that since we're in the Olympics. Remember in the 80s that didn't one of the ice skaters hurt the other ice skater? Yeah. Right, yeah. No names, but yeah, we all remember, well, not you. Anyone under, I guess, 40 won't remember that, but I do. Right, that when you're in competition, and you have a weapon, something might take over your system in a way that causes you to do something that you did not intend to do. And I had a dear friend whose family member was murdered, and he became a victims rights advocate, and really started to try to understand what are the constituent parts of a criminal act. And it has to do with what he told me is that it has to do with a predisposition, an opportunity in time, and a weapon. Or something with which to engage the act of violence. And if any one of those isn't there, it's probably not going to happen. But I think about these two, and they're in this kind of competitive environment, which is something I'm just going to tag for later. They're in this competitive environment, and they come on in, and they engage in an act of violence that may have taken that priest very much by surprise. Okay. If someone doesn't mind grabbing a couple source sheets for Wendy and I, thank you. Okay, thank you, Elise. Thanks, Kellen. Yes, Jeff, and then Gary.
If the rabbis saw that this is happening, couldn't they have set some boundaries or something like that, penalize them, or that automatically wouldn't have that? They wouldn't have that opportunity.
This is great. Okay, so Jeff, I'm gonna bracket your question for a moment, which is based on some of the other stories that we've seen. Where are the rabbis at this time? Did they have the ability to say something that could have stopped this or could have changed the outcome of this story? I'm gonna hold that for just a moment. We're gonna circle back to that. Gary, really quickly, and then we'll go on. Oh.
This idea of looking at one up introduces the notion of intentionality. It's one thing to shove somebody, get them out of the way. It's another to maybe kill them, harm them. The issue of harm to the person maybe is the one-upmanship.
So, and maybe he didn't intend to kill him, but that's as Jill's saying, there's something kind of takes over, and he might afterwards think, oh my God, what have I done? Or the violence might be part of him now. I'm gonna suggest a couple of things. And we're still on text 2 on the first page here. So I want to suggest a couple of things. One, while we might have this kind of fantasy image of the Temple Mount and the rituals of the Temple Mount as this sort of sacred, holy, soulful, spiritual space, in fact, the rabbis tell a lot of stories about the Temple Mount, unlike the one that that is most central in my life, the story of the circling, which is actually very peaceful and holy and beautiful, but that are quite violent. And the way that sacrifice of animals happened was a bloody business. And the way that the rabbis imagine that bloody business is really gory. And so I'm just going to give you, for a moment, a text from the Yerushalmi. It says, it asks this question, why did they plug up the temple court drain and leave the priests up to their knees in blood? And they said it was a mark of praise for the priests that they were soaked up to the knees in blood. And the scholars say that when the rabbis say that, they're not actually praising the priests for being up to their knees in blood. It's objectively disgusting and foul. And so what they're doing is they're kind of casting aspersion on the priestly class, written now 150, 300 years after the priests were done. Like, this is the next iteration of Judaism. We wouldn't stand knee deep in blood and guts. We wouldn't stab each other in the back the way that the priests did. It seems on some level, and I will cite here one scholar who writes about this, Yonatan Miller, who says that the rabbis were unsparing in their caricatures of hot-headed priests. Like, they're really, again, in the theme that we've hit numerous times here, trying to establish their leadership as very clearly differentiated from the leadership that came before them. The priests were at the epicenter of Jewish life before the destruction of the temple. And we don't engage like them. They are violent, they're bloody, whether it's in the sacrifice of animals or, in this case, in the sacrifice of an actual person, because we use this guy used the sacrificial knife in order to kill the person. I want to just add another element here, which is if I asked you, how does our tradition generally look at the priestly class and violence, if we were to think about just the Torah, not the rabbinic text, so where in the Torah do we see incidents of priests or the ancestors of priests engaging in acts of violence in the Torah? There are a number of these cases. Can you think? Okay, so well, first we have Abraham, who seems to be very willing to slaughter his own son, right? If you look at text number 4, you have Shimon and Levi, 2 of Jacob's sons, who, when Dinah is raped by Shechem, what do? They take out their sword, they mass circumcise. First, they have the men of the town mass circumcised, and then they kill every single man in the city, right? And who the Levi'im, the priests, are descendants of Levi. You'd wonder why any person would name their son Levi after given the violence of Shimon and Levi. Okay, and then here's another one. Like, just there are a couple more here. I'm on text number 5 now from Numbers 25. Pinchas, who is also a priest. And Pinchas, of course, sees an Israelite man having sex with a non-Israelite woman. And what does he do? He takes out a knife and he stabs them through both of them and kills them both. And what happens when he does that? Is he punished for this act of violence? It stops a plague, right? And God ends up seemingly giving Pinchas a blessing. And so it seems like our tradition is not even ambivalent about these priests engaging in violence. They're more, when the golden calf happens, Moshe sends the priests out, the Levi'im out, to go and slaughter thousands of Israelites for dancing around the calf. So this idea of priests being associated with blood and guts and excessive violence against animals and against humans is very much entrenched in the Torah. And it seems to me that not only are the rabbis, in telling this story about our priest acting like a child, racing his friend up the thing, and then because of his fight or flight, grabbing his knife and stabbing his friend in the back, our rabbis are not only criticizing the priests of the temple era, but are also, in a way, offering a tikkun to the priests of the Torah era, saying, we have this open question. Every year when we get to Parshat Pinchas, we ask the same question, which is, we don't advocate that kind of zealotry, right? Pinchas, the guy who stabbed the people having sex in front of the community. We don't advocate that kind of vigilante zealousness. But the Torah does seem to approve of it. God seems to approve of it. And now it seems like the rabbis, by telling this most extreme version of the story here, like, oh, you like priestly violence? Well, let's see what priestly violence really feels like. In a way, are answering that, saying, no, we don't actually advocate for this because it's horrific. I mean, you could barely read it. Like, several of you, when we read it, went like this, right? Like, our bodies cringe even reading about the story. Bob and then Jill.
I just wondered, how do folks who dream about the rebuilding of the temple deal with these Talmudic passages?
Right, and are they? Bob's asking, how do people who dream about the Bayit Shlishi, the rebuilding of the now the third temple, how do they deal with the rabbinic imagining of the temple as the seat of violence in many ways? And by the way, I wouldn't assume that they're as horrified by it as you and I are, Bob. Right, and just keep that in mind as we continue to read this story. Okay, Jill.
After the destruction of the second temple, now we were in diaspora and we were living amongst other people's laws, and so it was also like a PR thing because we
Great,
live,
that's great. Okay, so Jill's saying that these stories, the Bavli is telling this story, remember, in the diaspora, living among other people, and we might be in environments where people are looking at our sacred text saying, you are a people who advocate violence. And looking at our history saying, look at what the people did back in the temple. They used to kill animals, and maybe they even killed each other. And we're like, oh, we're not like them, right? We are going to shine a light on this narrative in order to show how wrong it is, because we're trying to be good Jews in the diaspora. I think that's very good. Jeff, really quickly, then we go on.
We're using the word flight or flight.
Fight or flight, yeah.
I'd like to question that because usually that's used when your life is in danger.
Ah, great,
These
okay.
two guys are racing up there. They're like, I don't see their life. in danger.
Well, certainly the guy who's behind is not in any
Yeah,
danger,
of course,
right?
But the guy who's stabbing him,
Right.
that's not right.
Okay. I mean, I think we could get into I don't want to get into a whole conversation about it now, but you and Jill should talk afterwards. And I think I think the point was that there's some kind of hormonal instinct that he's acting on right now that he doesn't necessarily even fully understand himself. Okay, if I may, we got to go on because Jeff asked a really interesting question, which is where are the rabbis when this act of violence is taking place? So far, all we've seen is that 2 priests are running up the ramp, fighting to get there first for the removal of the ash, which is a sacred housekeeping chore, and they can't wait to be the one to do it. The one who's behind takes out his knife, presumably intended to kill an animal as a sacrifice, and instead stabs his brother, his friend, his colleague through the heart, but from the back, okay? That's all we know so far. Now turn to text number 7. Okay. Well, because the guy's in front of him. The other guy's it's the one in the back who stabs the one in the front, okay? So now look at text number 7, and here the Tosefta, which is where we get the story, the Tosefta continues. Rabbi Tzadok, the other Rabbi Tzadok, as I call him, then stood up on the steps of the entrance hall of the sanctuary. And so this is Amad Rabbi Tzadok al Ma'alot Ha'ulam. So this is the entranceway. We're in the most sacred space, okay? We're right beside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies. We're at the perimeter of that holiest of spaces, so that he's on the margin in between the most sacred space and the public space where the people are. And he stands up and he cries out to he says, Achinu, Beit Yisrael, Shim'u, brothers and sisters of Israel, hear me, listen to me. The language of Shema is very critical here. They've all just witnessed this murder because this would happen in public. And he cries out to the people of Beit Yisrael, to the community. And he says the following. There's a verse in the Torah that says, if a person is found dead, slain in the land, and it's not known who killed him, your elders and your judges will come forth. I'm going to pause here for a moment because what we're going to have to do now is understand why Rabbi Tzadok, in the immediate aftermath of a murder that was witnessed by presumably thousands of people of the priestly class and of the people, Beit Yisrael, is going to be teaching us a verse of Torah or a lesson from Torah. In a moment, we're going to look to the case of the Glarufa that comes from Deuteronomy in order to understand what he's saying. But he is going to say, unequivocally, we learn a lesson in Deuteronomy about what to do when there's a dead body that's found. What about us? How do we apply what we learned from Torah to what we just witnessed here? So he's first and foremost establishing himself as a translator. I'm going to take the sacred ideas that are at the heart of our tradition, and I'm going to translate them into what we've all just witnessed in order that we can make sense of what we just saw. So he says, in the story of the Glarufa, he says, the elders and the judges have to come forth and essentially take responsibility for the slain, for the murder that's taken place. We're going to understand that more in a moment. What about us? Who's taking responsibility for this murder now? Who's going to bring forth this heifer whose neck is broken, this Egla Arufa? Is it the city of Jerusalem? Is it the rabbis who are going to bring a calf? Or is it about the temple courtyard? Is it the priests who are going to bring it forward? Who's responsible right now is the question that Rabbi Tzadok asks in this moment. So we're going to we're going to pause for a moment to go back in time and understand the ritual of the Eglah Rufa. So now I'm on text number 8, and we could do, and we should, an entire hour just on the Eglah Rufa. What I'm going to offer us here is just a basic gloss of what this, of what's happening from the perspective of the Torah, and then the way that it's read by the rabbis in Masechet Sota in text number 9. Okay, so Deuteronomy 21:1. I'd love for someone else to read, but I'm going to do it because I think you won't be able to hear me on the Zoom. Okay, so this is what we learn in the book of Deuteronomy. Once you remember, Deuteronomy is Moses' last great speech to the people as they have made their way from Egypt and enslavement into the promised land. And what they're being told is how to build a society in the promised land that will be a counter testimony to the oppression that they just experienced in Egypt, or that their parents' generation experienced in Egypt, because everybody in the desert who was enslaved had to die off in order for them to get there. So this is Moses' last will and testament, and it's his attempt to say, listen, folks, this is how you build a just society. You're about to cross over into the land, and you're going to establish certain laws and principles that have to be operative once you get into the land so that you don't become Egypt. Right? Everything we fled, we cannot recreate in this place of promise. So here's what he says. Once you get there, okay, the place that God has assigned to you to possess, you find someone has been slain and they're lying out in the open. But the identity of the murderer is not known to you. So your elders and your magistrates go out and they measure the distance from the corpse to the closest town. So imagine now, it's actually easy for me to imagine this because I was just there, and like the communities were built on hilltops, and so now you can see one community from the other across the hilltops. So imagine that a body's found in between two hilltop communities. A dead body, someone's killed a person, but we don't know who it was. So they take out a measuring stick and they measure the distance from that dead body to this hilltop, and this hilltop, and they find the one that it's closest to. And then it says the elders of the town nearest to the dead body then take a heifer, a virgin heifer, a heifer that's never been worked before. And the elders of that town, so now we have the elders and the magistrates, and the heifer. The elders of that town bring the heifer down to an overflowing wadi. I just looked out over Wadi Kelt last week, where we used to hike actually in the 90s. I don't think people hike there anymore. But you bring this heifer out to this rough, overflowing wadi, which is not tilled or sown, out of the city, out of the town, into this kind of rough outdoor place. And there in the wadi, they break the heifer's neck, and the priests, the sons of Levi, come forward. The priests who we're talking about here, the descendants of the Leviim. So the priest sons of Levi come forward, for the eternal God has chosen them for divine service and to pronounce blessings in the name of God. And every lawsuit in case of assault is subject to their ruling. And all of the elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the heifer with the broken neck out in the middle of the wadi, and they make this declaration. They say, Yadenu lo shafchu et hadam hazeh. Our hands did not spill this blood. Ve'einenu lo ra'u. And our eyes did not even see it. Which raises a really interesting question, right? There's a dead body. Our tradition cannot imagine a world in which someone's dead and nobody's responsible. This person has been slain. We need to hold someone responsible. We don't know who the murderer is. So Deuteronomy says, well, somebody's responsible for it. So go to the closest town, bring the elders, the magistrates, the judges, the whole upper echelon of that society. And they come out to this place, this rough outdoor space that's outside the safety and protection of their homes. And you have them engage in this weird ritual act of breaking the neck of an innocent heifer who, like all the animals sacrificed at the temple, did nothing to deserve this himself. But you break the neck of the heifer and then you wash your hands and say, we didn't do it. It wasn't us. Now, presumably, we already knew it wasn't them. Like, why would we assume that it's the mayor's fault? The mayor wasn't out there. The mayor didn't know anything about it. Why would we assume that it's the elders' fault? The elders are the murderer. Why do they have to go through this expiation ritual? We don't think they're really murderers. If we did, they shouldn't be in leadership, right? So the rabbis are confused by this, and they see it as an opportunity to explicate and to teach us a moral lesson. And there's a lot here, but I'm just going to pull this one piece from Sota in text number 9, where the rabbis say, they shall speak and say, Yadenu lo shafchu et adam hazeh. Our hands did not shed this blood. But why would it enter our hearts that the elders of the court are actually murderers, they say? Why is it necessary for them to publicize that they didn't kill this guy? Everybody knows that they aren't the murderers. Rather, they must declare, it is not so that this victim came to us and we dismissed him. And it's not so that we saw him and we left him. In other words, he didn't come to us and we in turn dismissed him without food. We didn't see him, and so we left him without an escort. Meaning, what the rabbis are doing is, I think, absolutely brilliant. They're sort of turning the whole narrative on its head. The reason that the elders of this community have to engage in an expiation ritual is because they actually are responsible. Now, how are they possibly responsible for a murder that they know nothing about? Because they're the leaders of a society in which a person walked through their town and we did not see him, and we did not train our community to see him and say, hey, you're a stranger, come on in for a meal, let me help you. Where are you headed? Oh, you're going to that other hilltop community? It's not safe to go there at night. You might get hit by a robber or by, someone else. Let us escort you there. Let us ride you there on one of our animals. In other words, they created a community in which an unknown person came and went through their town and was not treated with the dignity that he, as a child of God, deserved. So they actually are responsible for murder, even though they didn't hold the knife, but they're responsible for murder because they created an environment. I think about this all the time. When people come into shul and they're a little bit, struggling socially, a little bit off, and I just pray that someone's gonna go over and say hello. You can sort of see from where we stand in the front, you can see what's happening in the room. You just pray that someone treats them with kindness and love. And the text is essentially saying, if someone doesn't, and then they walk out because they didn't feel cared for, and something terrible happens to them on the way out, guess who's responsible? Me, right? And all of us. Because we created an environment in which people aren't treated like an image of God. Now, why would Moshe be teaching that lesson to the Israelite people just before they enter into the promised land?
Well, it's what you said before, he wants to differentiate it from Egypt, right?
Yeah.
They're different.
I think, Keith, thank you, Keith. I think what Moses is saying is, it's not enough to not be a murderer. You have to create an environment that doesn't allow for the kind of dehumanization, erasure, that leaves people vulnerable to murder. And I would one-up that even more now, translating this into the story with Rabbi Tzadok, to say, it's not enough to not be a murderer. You have to be a person who actively works against a culture of violence in your community. Because even if you're not the guy who pulled the knife, you're actually responsible. We are all responsible for that culture. So now, go back to Rabbi Tzadok's word for a moment on number 7. So he says, back then, in the time of the Torah, it was the elders and the magistrates and the who had to come forward, the judges who had to come forward and say, it wasn't me, meaning it was me. It was my responsibility. I didn't create an environment that's welcoming. But who now is responsible? Take that weird, like creepy story about bringing a virgin heifer into the wadi and breaking its neck, because Torah is alive, Rabbi Tzadok is saying. And that Torah means something to us now. We're living in that promised land. Have we created the kind of environment that Moshe was afraid we would fail to create, in which we understand the preciousness of every human life, so much so that we will not allow for a culture of violence in our community? We can't allow, we won't stand for it. So much so that we see every single person as an image of God, so that we won't let them go out unaccompanied and say, you know what, that's kind of that's a dangerous street to cross. Let me help you cross that street. I'm from here. I know the safest way to get home. When we fail to do that, we've essentially recreated Egypt, right? We've created the same conditions that have oppressed us. So now Rabbi Tzadok stands before, he's in the breach. The priests are on this side and the people of Israel are on this side. And he's saying, I'm asking you now, who's responsible? And let me just say, who's responsible for this murder? Like, objectively, if you're a judge in this case, who's going to prison? The murderer, the guy who took a knife in front of thousands of people and stabbed another guy in the back. That guy's going to prison. Rabbi Tzadok doesn't even talk to that guy. Like, it's obvious that that guy's responsible for his own behavior. But Rabbi Tzadok's interested in the societal rot, not in the individual murderer, because he's saying murder doesn't come out of nowhere. People don't just engage in acts of violence without a context. So who's responsible? And here he points to the two groups that he thinks are most likely responsible. The priestly class that's engaging in this kind of violent, somebody mentioned this earlier, like it's normative for them. In the Mishnah, he knocks a guy off the ramp. In the Gemara, he pulls out a knife. They created a race, right? They knew the nature of human beings, that when you're racing for something that's of great value, the worst of you is going to come out. Like, try to run a campaign, by going high when they go low. Try, right? Like, I think everybody who sets out, not everybody, I think a lot of people set out to run campaigns where they only go high. It's just when you're in a race, it brings out sometimes the worst in you. So who's responsible? The people who are part of that culture that encourage that kind of culture of competition. Someone's going to get killed, right? Yes.
The legal system really sits on top, and the educational system is what really holds us together as a society. So are we educating ourselves about how to be caring?
Yeah, that's great. So there's both a legal system that's responsible and there's an educational system. Thank you for sharing that. And so what are we teaching? Are we teaching people how to see each other, or are we demonizing the other? Or are we teaching our children, both in word and also in deed, that like you get what you can get? It doesn't matter what happens to the other. You go and grab what you can get. So how is this message being permeating our society? Wait, I saw, okay, Elad and, yeah, okay. I'm gonna get all three of you. Okay.
I'm just like, Rabbi Tzadok stands there and he's like preaching and he's bringing something from the Torah, but he's not taking any responsibility himself. Isn't he one of the leaders? That's the perfect time for him. There's a body laying, like someone dead right in front of him, and he's deciding to teach right now. Instead of saying, you know what, I was part of this system that created this race to get the ashes that maybe allowed for something like this to happen. I'm taking responsibility right now and leading by example. He's not doing that.
Okay, great. I'm going to just repeat Elad's for the folks who are with us virtually. So Elad is saying, is Rabbi Tzadok pointing the responsibility to others, or is he also able to take some responsibility for himself? And it seems like he's pointing outward, which is totally possible, and I may be influenced by the way that Steinsaltz and others are reading this text, but I think that he's part of the we, saying like, look, are we not responsible, right? Is it not all of us who are responsible? I read him as part of he's saying we've created a culture in which we come here to witness this horrific race. I'm trying not to say the thing that I really want to say, but it's just, sorry, but I'm just thinking about brain trauma injuries in football players. Who's responsible? Is it like the owners of those teams who are making the money and keep putting guys out on the field knowing that many of them are going to have severe brain trauma by the time they're 35? Or, is it the fans? Is it all of us? Is it anybody who tunes in, except for the people who only watch the Bad Bunny halftime show? But everybody else, who's responsible for the violence in our society? And I've always read Rabbi Tzadok as basically saying, he was there. Elad, you're right. He's right there. He's part of it. He's he's in the middle of the game. And he says, wait a minute. Something just happened that's horrific. And I'm not even talking about the guy with the knife. I don't even care about that guy on some level. Are we comfortable just blaming the priests, or do we have to turn to all of us? And Steinsaltz adds here that if the obligation does fall on the city, it's going to be the rabbis or the sages who are the ones who are going to be sort of the leaders, the representatives of the city who have to make expiation for them. I know, Stuart, we have 2 more comments really quick, and then I gotta
There's an element of
keep
this
going.
that also, I think, Rabbi Tzadok calls for special accountability of the priests, because he's asking the people it's not known who's smitten them. He's saying the people did not. I mean, you all saw who did this, but part of our culture is we don't know who did this, right? If it's the priest. So
Yeah.
It's a call. Invoking the unknown is a call to. It's a statement against this blindness of the crimes of the priesthood.
Okay, that's so good. That's so good. So Rabbi Tzadok is making a statement against the moral blindness, right, that is endemic in the priesthood. Okay, that's great, which again feeds this narrative that part of this story is a way of the rabbis differentiating themselves from the priests. Just when I say this, I mean, this keeps coming up in both Rabbi Panitz's sessions and in many of the ones that we've done, but the amount of catastrophe of the destruction of the temple, the level of crisis that we were in as a people, and the burden of creating a new Judaism that was not entirely discontinuous from the old, but also did not bring the schmutz of the old with it, was enormous. And so the rabbis need to establish themselves as different, even as they're remaining connected and related, right? This is, as I said on Friday night, like pouring new wine into old barrels, quoting one of my teachers, Malila Hellner Eshed, about our tradition, pouring new wine into old barrels. Okay, Scott, is it very quick?
No, it's been said.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so now Rabbi Tzadok is standing there, and he's saying to the people, listen, folks, it's not just about that guy, it's all of us. We are all responsible. And what happens? They burst into tears. The people cry, it says at the end of number 7. The people, think about I love this, the tenderness of the Talmud, that they record the people's tears. Rabbi Tzadok has awakened something in the people that looks a lot like radical accountability. What's my role when there's another school shooting? What's my role? I am not the shooter, God forbid. But I live in a society where, do you know how many guns we have now in America? It's like 580 million guns in this country. We're all a part of that, folks. We want to be the good guys, and we would never do the wrong thing, but we live in a culture of violence, and the people get it, and they burst into tears. But then, look at number 10. The father of the boy. And somebody told me last night, hi Rivka, if you're here with us, that she's with us on Zoom, and she said, I can tell you're smiling when you're teaching, because she can tell that it gives me joy to share these texts with all of you. They're horrific texts, but I love the chutzpah of the rabbis telling this story. The dead body's on the guy's been stabbed. The guy who's been stabbed is lying on the ground. Rabbi Tzadok stands up. He points a finger this way. He points a finger this way. And then the father of the boy who has been stabbed comes running up the ramp because he was watching. It's like the Olympics. Like everybody's there and they're watching what's happening. And he sees his child convulsing on the ground. He hasn't died yet. He's dying. And he stands up and says, may my son's death be an atonement for you. Kishahu, wait, hold on a second. He says, Harehu kaparatchem. May this boy be a kapara for you, Yom Kippur. May his death be an atonement for you and your sins, people, he says. Why? Because the knife which is in his body has not yet become ritually impure, because the knife will only become unfit for future use if it's inside a dead body. But if it's inside a dying body and we pull it out now, the knife can be wiped off and used again for sacrifice. So don't worry. We're good. Don't worry. And so you have to imagine this scene where Rabbi Tzadok has brought the people to the sense of radical accountability for the violence that is pervasive in their community. And they cry, and they're about to make tshuva. Something's going to change. But the father of the boy himself says, let me remind you what our priorities are in this culture. And then the Gemara says it explicitly, quoting the Tosefta, in case we didn't know. This comes to teach you that the ritual purity of their utensils was of more concern to them than even the shedding of blood. But it's not like the Kohen Gadol or like the high priest or one of the priests came over and said it. It's literally the father of the dying boy who says, don't worry, we're so okay. Yaakov?
One is, some weeks ago, you read the story of Hamza and Bar Hamza as like possibly in dialogue with like Jesus' story.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about something about a human being sacrificed, but the focus on ritual, and also just I'm struck by the word tinok.
Yeah.
Somebody who's an adult.
Yeah.
And
who acts like a child,
who acts
but
like a
okay,
child.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my second hot take that has never been proven or disproven by any Talmudic scholar, which is like so obvious that I can't believe I haven't seen it written somewhere. But like the rabbis are saying, what father offers his dead son as an atonement for other people's sins? What father in Jerusalem offers his dead son and says to the people, don't worry, you're good. My guy died, you're fine now. So I feel it's very clear to me that this is the rabbis responding to Christianity, saying, imagine that scenario that is at the heart of your faith playing out in real life. Like, we would be horrified by that. If the father was in father form, like human form, why are we okay with it when the father's in God's form? So that feels very clear to me. Yes, really quickly, RBZ.
The Abraham story, he actually succeeded.
Right. So this is, this something the scholars do this, put this story in dialogue with Abraham, who also was willing to sacrifice his son. But here it actually happened. But the idea that the father stands up and says, this is a kapara for you. This is an atonement for your sins, feels to me very clearly in dialogue with early Christianity. And remember, I mean, the relationship that Jews in this time had with the Roman Empire, I understand why they would want to tell a story that makes Christianity look very bad. Right, but I think to my mind, that's very clearly here, and I'm going to come back to the Kamsa Bar Kamsa in a moment. We have only 5 minutes left. I want to just say a couple of things. One, the Eglat Arufah story, the broken-necked heifer story, it doesn't really apply here. Like Rabbi Tzadok is making an interpretive leap here. It doesn't really apply. I mean, one of the reasons why is the heart of the Eglat Arufah story is we don't know who the murderer is, and here we saw it. And Rabbi Tzadok says, I don't care. There's a moral message for us that's more important than the fact that this lesson doesn't exactly translate. So I think that that's really important. The other thing is that this is, the Eglat Arufah speaks to when there's a body that's found in the outside of the city, when it's specifically speaking to something that happens like out in the wilderness, and this is happening right in the heart of the city. It's not really the right teaching to bring at this moment, but that does not stop Rabbi Tzadok, because he needs the moral message, which is we are all responsible. And the people start to get it until the father says, let me remind you all that what we actually care about is ritual purity more than human life. We actually care about the religious practice over the human beings who might be harmed in the course of this. Let me just keep going for a moment because I have to do something else here. Okay, so there's one more piece to this, which is we have to go back to Gittin. And for those of you who weren't with us when we did the Bar Kamsa, Bar Kamsa, and then the following class, A, you can listen to it online, but B, I'm just gonna tell you very quickly, you may remember toward the end of that story, Vespasian Caesar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai has escaped from Jerusalem. And he has this conversation with Vespasian Caesar. And he says to him, you're going to become Caesar now. You're going to become like the emperor. And Vespasian Caesar says, well, you've predicted that. So ask me anything, ask me for your biggest wish and I'll grant it to you. And remember that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai does not say, call off the siege on Jerusalem and let the people live. He does not say, save the temple. He does not say, save the people of Jerusalem. What he says are three very strange things. Give me Yavne and its sages. Give me a little town outside of Jerusalem and let me be there with my rabbis so that I can rebuild Judaism, which is the rabbinic Judaism as we now know it. And then he says, spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel, which means the thing I'm going to build cannot be totally discontinuous from the past, but it has to have some thread of connection to the past. And then he said, give me doctors to heal Rabbi Tzadok. What? So, it's very strange. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai will never live this down. And to his death and afterwards, people are like, why did he ask for that? He should have asked to save the people, but he doesn't. But he does ask for doctors. It's like you're granted 3 wishes, and you wish, let me stay up an hour later tonight. It seems like a nothing of a wish, given that literally everything's on the line. But then we're going backwards just a little bit, which is in the story that just a half a page before that, we met Rabbi Tzadok. And do you remember Marta? The wealthy woman who died because she was hungry and she stepped on poop outside and oh my God, the indignity, and then she dies. This is in the middle of the siege of Jerusalem when the people are starving to death. And in the midst of the story of Marta, there's this little story which we glossed over because I knew that we were going to come back to it. So not only did she step on dung, but there's a version of the story that says she ate a fig of Rabbi Tzadok. And she became so disgusted that she died. The rabbis then asked, what are these figs? Rabbi Tzadok observed a fast for 40 years, praying for Jerusalem. And so he was so emaciated. For 40 years he fasted. You could tell from the outside that he was on the verge of death. So they brought him figs and he would just suck out the liquid of the fig because he didn't want to break his fast. So Rabbi Tzadok was fasting for 40 years, a very important amount of time for us. I know our time's up. Okay, here's what I think is happening here. The thread of the stories in Gittin are all pointing to the total moral failure of the rabbis. They fail to step in to protect the dignity of another person. They fail to step up when their people are under siege. They don't want to upset anyone. They don't want to start a ruckus. The rabbis in the room when Bar Kamsa is humiliated, not only do they not stand up and say, hey, stop bullying that guy, they also don't run over and quietly whisper to the host, leave that guy alone. And they don't run after Bar Kamsa and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Come have dinner at my house. They don't do anything. We see again and again and again that the rabbis in the Talmud are telling us a story of rabbinic failure. This is a failure of moral leadership, with one exception, Rabbi Tzadok. He's the one person who stands up in Yoma in the face of a murder and says, Torah matters to us. And what Torah says is that we're all responsible, every one of us, and it almost works. There's a moment where everything almost changes. The people burst into tears. They may have actually been able to save that Judaism. But then it was overrun by the dominant norms of the society, which is we don't actually care about human life. We care about religious practice. We care about sacrificial ornamentation. And Rabbi Tzadok reaches a moment where he has yelled and screamed and cried and taught and preached, and he's just lost. So he just fasts because it's all he can do. And I have this image of an elderly Rabbi Tzadok who's just been through it all. Imagine like an elder of the movement who's like, I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you where this culture of violence was going, where this unhinged power was going, the corruption, the cruelty, the way that we're all complicit in it. I tried. You did not listen to me. At some point, he stopped crying out and he just fasted. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is not a coward or a fool for asking for doctors that can save Rabbi Tzadok. Because what does tzedok mean? It's righteousness, it's justice. One thing Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understands is, I am going to be rebuilding this tradition from scratch, and I cannot do that without righteousness and justice at the heart of it. So this guy represents the very best of us, and he failed to save the old world. We need him as the thread bringing us into the new world. And it is my deepest prayer for all of us as we navigate this world-shifting time, that we figure out how we can step into the role of Rabbi Tzadok and look this way and this way and this way and figure out how we can stop the culture of violence, violent language, violent actions all around us now before it's too late. And even if we, God forbid, feel like it gets to the point where it's too late, we don't change. Rabbi Tzadok does not change. He is who he is. He is just and he is righteous. And I hope that in some way that can be for us a model and a blessing for our time as well. I'm so sorry about the time. I'm going to work on this. But we're going to say Kaddish de Rabbanan, Sipra, who's saying Kaddish for your mother. And is there anyone else saying Kaddish who wants to join us? Do you want to say a name?
Yeah, my grandfather, Bob Richards.
For Bob also. And Sipra, your mother's name? Rita. Thank you. Yitkadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah. B'yamad divrei chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitrumam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran ba'ama v'imru Amen. Al Yisrael va'al Rabbanan va'al Talmidei-hon va'al kol Talmidei Talmidei-hon va'al kol man da'askim be'oraita diva atra hadein v'diva chol atar va'atar yehei lahon elechon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichinu mizonei revichei v'for kana min kadam avon divishmaya v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Osei shalom b'mramav hu ya'asei shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.